So thank you all for coming, and it's our pleasure today to welcome Diane Epstein to come talk with all of you. And I know she's been doing a lot of stuff around the school, so we're really glad to have a chance to have her here to talk with us more related to careers and the IOM. And there's biographies, so you can all pick up one and get an overview, but I just wanted to briefly mention that Diane is currently serving as Chief of Mission for the IOM Ghana office, where she's worked since 2009 and has over 18 years of work experience in national and international programs and development management. So we're really excited to hear more from her today, and I'm going to let her tell her story because you probably do it a lot better than I can. So Diane, thank you for being here, and I'll turn it over to you.
Just put this on, I think. Okay, great. High tech. Okay, well, thanks for introducing me. It's actually really a pleasure to be back here because I graduated from Syracuse University in 1990. And this is probably my third time back to Syracuse since I graduated. First time was right after I graduated. I still had, the excitement of Syracuse and loving, my experience here. So I came back the first year, but then never came back until 2012 when I was already working for IOM, and we started a program with Syracuse University. So it's so nice to come back. It's also my first time in probably. Since I moved to Africa 10 years ago, that I'm actually seeing snow again. So the first thing I did when I got off the plane at JFK was go outside and touch the snow because it had been so long. And I thought, because I'm originally from New York, so I experienced a lot of snow, that this would make a really good snowball, But now I come up to Syracuse and it's a bit dry, the snow, and so the snowballs aren't so good. So anyway, but yes, just to tell you a little bit about myself and how I got involved with IOM, and then I will explain a little bit about what IOM does and maybe come up with some suggestions for you if you wanted to get into IOM or another kind of organization. As I said, I graduated Syracuse in 1990, and I moved to New York City, and I was an education major. I was young at the time when I started university. I didn't know what exactly I wanted to do. I knew I liked school, so I became a teacher, and I taught for 3 years in New York City. But ever since I was a little kid in elementary school, I always had this dream of visiting like 6 continents in the world. Not Antarctica, because I don't like the cold. I don't know why I went to Syracuse, but I just wanted to visit. And I loved traveling, even though I barely traveled. I didn't have a passport until I was older. I studied abroad with Syracuse, and I just, enjoyed other cultures. So 3 years of teaching in New York City, I moved to Japan on this program called the Japanese Exchange and Teaching Program. And it was part of a government-sponsored program, and I taught English in Osaka for 3 years in a high school. So I got to travel all around Asia. I had never been to Asia before. It was really exciting, and I kind of got a little bit of the travel bug. And after Japan, I decided to travel around the world with my friend for a year, which a lot of Americans don't do, but a lot of other nationalities do, like especially Australians, because they're on the other side of the world. You always see Australians. They take a year off, and they're traveling everywhere. So I went with my friend backpacking through Africa, a little bit of the Middle East, and a little bit of Asia, and then I went back to do another master's. By then I had done a master's. Actually, after Syracuse I did a master's, so then I taught 3 years. So I traveled, and I still didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, and I decided to go back for a second master's. I went to the UK, I did a master's, I met my husband, and I started an internship with IOM in London, primarily to probably stay in the country. I wanted to kind of form the relationship, and I got lucky. I got an internship. It was an unpaid internship, but I was so excited, and I really, really enjoyed the work. And then the internship, I got in at a very good time, The office was quite small. It was about 12 staff. I was probably the 12th staff. And then it just kept growing. So it was lucky I got in at the right time, and I stayed in the UK for about 4 years with IOM London. But I was always looking for a more international post. I mean, okay, London's international, but in this line of work that we do, we talk about the field. It's the field. You know, Europe is technically, well, we have our headquarters in Geneva. It's technically the field, but it's actually not the field. You know, the field is like more developmental kind of work, you know, South America, Africa, Asia. Europe work's interesting, but it's in a different context. So I was looking to get out into the field, and this opportunity came up in Zimbabwe as a project development officer. And again, I got in at the right time. I was the 20th staff there in 2009. There was a big crisis in Zimbabwe. We were providing a lot of humanitarian assistance, and we just grew to about 200 by the time I left in 2009. So again, get in at the right time. I loved my work there. It was mostly humanitarian. It was providing support to displaced persons, primarily those that were affected by could be floods, but also political decisions that might have happened. And we were providing food, non-food items, shelter, some water, sanitation. We worked very closely with partners. And it was a really good team. It was a really exciting team. And we ended up setting up several offices. It was, you know, a lovely country, actually. But in this line of work, when you sign up to be an international person, you know, international, what we call an international civil servant, you sign up to rotate. So you sign up to move to another country. So in 2009, I was asked to rotate to Ghana, where I became chief of mission. Actually, in Zimbabwe, I started as a project development officer, but as we grew, we needed more positions, so I became the deputy chief of mission. So in Zimbabwe, I was the chief of mission. And I would say that, in Ghana chief of mission. I would say that in Ghana, within IOM, you have the full range of IOM activities in Ghana. You have everything from sometimes humanitarian when a crisis breaks out, but it's not usually related to Ghana, unless there's a little flood. It's, you know, for example, the Ivory Coast crisis. Ivory Coast is the country next to Ghana. When the crisis broke out, we saw an influx of a large number of migrants coming into Ghana, fleeing the crisis. They went to Liberia as well, and a few Mali and Guinea, but many came to Ghana, so we have to deal with the crisis. Or when there was some floods, there was a little bit of support that we provided in the north of Ghana where the floods were. But primarily we do work, and I'll explain in a presentation, around some development or refugee resettlement or other activities. It's a really interesting office. We have 72 staff. And we have 5 sub-offices. We also support a little bit with Togo and Benin, primarily because they're very close to Ghana. The capital of Ghana, which is Accra, is only 2.5 hours, 3 if you're crossing the border to the capital of Togo. And Cotonou, which is the capital of Benin, is only about 6 hours away. So we provide some support because we have very small offices there. Actually, we didn't have any offices there up until about 3 years ago, but now we have offices and we provide support. We have 6 internationals in IOM Ghana, and as with any office around the world, the majority of staff are always national staff. Sometimes you don't even have internationals depending upon the size of the office. But in Ghana, we have 6. In Zimbabwe, we had 20 out of 200. So sometimes it's a 10% ratio, but there's no real formula for it. So what I wanted to do is just show you a little bit about IOM, the history of IOM. We recently celebrated our 60th anniversary. We were established in 1951. So about the same time that other UN agencies were established. And we were primarily established to help after World War II, we were established in Europe to help refugees resettle to other locations. And this is still some of the work that we do globally. Okay, so I just want to show, because of our 60th anniversary, so now we've been here for 63 years, because it was 1951 to 2014. They created a slideshow of 60 years with IOM. So you'll be able to see the evolution, knowing that we started as a resettlement agency, and you'll see photos from 1951 to 1961. And then I'll just explain, I'll go into a little bit about IOM, and then I will give suggestions, I think, on careers, and then you could ask questions, and I'll give my input and things like that. So, over. Okay, so we've been assisting a world on the move for 63 years. It's supposed to go automatically, but is it not going automatically?
Let's see.
Serves me right. I should have checked on it.
It's okay.
Okay, I think just quickly go through. Okay, so we were established after World War II, and as I mentioned, to displace Europeans. We were a European-based organization, and so our name at that time actually evolved into IOM, but before that it was like the European Intercommittee on Migration, or something like that. We've changed names twice. In about the 80s, we changed to the International Organization for Migration. Okay, so here's a photo from 1951. So we're always assisting people to move. So I think we can go kind of quickly, just to show you how we've evolved. So this is each year, a photo. ICEM, Intercommittee on European Migration. That's what it was called. We might have been doing cultural orientation there. This is Jews being resettled as well. And then, so we were, between 1965 and 1989, we did mostly refugee resettlement, Africa, Southeast Asia, and Central America. So we expanded outside of Europe. I think these are Chileans, actually, from, oh no, maybe not, because that would have been 73, I think.
The logo hasn't changed.
Yeah, I have to look at it, back at it. Yeah, yeah. Yes, yes. This is where we start getting more involved in other work outside of refugee resettlement. Then 1990 is where we really changed. We really became very global, and we started doing work in the area of emergencies, migration development, labor migration, counter-trafficking, return and reintegration, DDR, which is demobilization, I forget, something with emergencies, I have to look that up. SSR, I'm not sure what that is, migration health. And now it's IOM. I have to look back at the logo, interesting. So we're building shelters there. They're going to Canada. they're going to the States. That's USRP, U.S. Refugee Program. These are helping people when they go back home. I think that's Nepal, maybe. Not sure. Relief items. Okay, so our slogan is migration for the benefit of all. And then what I'll do is I'll just explain so you can see the perspective of a country mission. Okay, so I should take off the logo. I mean, I still use this logo, but it really, it's 2014 already, so next. Okay, so I explained all this already. You saw the evolution of IOM. Next slide. Okay, so this just shows over a 10-year period how we've changed so much. So we've gone from 67 governments being members of IOM to 155 today. We've grown from 119 offices to over 470 offices. We had 10 years ago, or a little more than 10 years ago, we had 686 projects. Now we have 2,360. And we've grown from 1,100 to 7,800 staff globally. And we've gone from a budget of 250 million to 1.2 billion. So this is just to show you that in 10 years, I would say that's really where IOM saw its real big growth. And we're still growing. Okay, this just shows our presence globally. We have the red dots are our regional offices. We have 8 regional offices. One in Central America, one in South America, one in West Africa, one in Southern Africa, and Cairo. Actually, this is a new in Kenya is a new regional office. It's not on the map, but this is an old map, just changed. We have in Bangkok. Vienna, and I'm not sure if I think it's in Brussels. So this just shows, but we have a presence in many countries throughout the world. And for West Africa, our regional office is in Dakar, Senegal. So my boss is in Senegal. Next. Okay, we have a variety of service areas in IOM. Our headquarters are in Geneva, and you could see there are several units in headquarters. So for example, we do work in the area of migration and development. So a lot of working with the diaspora, how they can contribute to the development of their country. We do regulating migration, which is things like counter trafficking, counter smuggling, stranded migrants. We do work on visa entry and border management. Assisted return and reintegration. We do work on migration health. So it could be two things. One is like health assessments for migrants going somewhere, but the other is could be research-based or emergency response. We do a lot of health programs, HIV/AIDS or health or gender-based violence, things like that, health and hygiene. We do facilitating migration, which could be students going somewhere, language training, cultural orientation, consular support services that we provide to governments. We also do resettlement, which, as I mentioned, was something we started with. We still do today. The U.S. happens to be one of the biggest, the largest country that accepts refugees from around the world. Canada being probably the second, or Canada, Australia, second or third. European takes a bit less. We do movements, emergency and post-crisis. So, for example, I mentioned the Ivory Coast crisis, but we deal with things like the Libya crisis. Right now there's a crisis in Central African Republic. Just wherever there's a crisis, we would be one of the partner agencies to respond. We also do claims programs. Actually, when I first started with IOM London, this was one of the programs I worked on, which was actually fascinating. It was compensation claims for forced enslaved laborers after World War II, funded by the German government and German industry. It was probably the last compensation program, large-scale compensation program. But we also do things related to land. a lot, because this has to do with migration. The whole tie-in was people were displaced, they migrate, and then we support them with claims programs. It sometimes works in some countries, not in all. And then we also influence policy, research, forum activities. Right now we're assisting the government of Ghana to develop a migration policy, which is really a big step because very few governments in Africa have a migration policy. So we're very excited about that. Okay, next. This just kind of shows where our projects mostly are. So for example, our largest programs are in regulating migration, which is counter-trafficking, counter-smuggling, border management projects. But then the second is also resettlement and emergency. Actually, when you talk about money, these bring in the most projects. I mean, this brings in the most funding from donors. Because when an emergency happens, or a lot of governments invest a lot of money in resettlement. But when we talk about projects, that brings in the most projects, but not necessarily the most funding. And then the other areas. This is where our work is primarily. The majority are in Europe, funded probably by donor governments from Europe, but also Africa. We do a lot of work in Africa and Asia and Oceania. Okay, next. Okay, this is our relationship with the UN. So there's Ban Ki-moon in Haiti with IOM staff. We're an observer in the UN General Assembly. We have a global agreement with the United Nations, which was signed in actually 1996. We have bilateral agreements with most UN agencies. And we do work interagency. So for example, in Ghana, I attend the UN country team meetings. I'm an active member. Many of our technical staff are attending all the interagency meetings, depending upon what they're involved in. So we're very, very active in that regard. Just to give you a snapshot of what a mission could look like, this is IOM Ghana. This is our main offices in Accra. Oh, we have 7 internationals, but I'll explain that. Accra. We also have a sub-office in Accra. The blue is our sub-offices. It's a Migration Health Assessment Center sub-office. So we have 2 offices actually in Accra. We have another sub-office in Takoradi, which was working on TB technology, gene expert technology. We're working with the TB, the Ghana Health Service on TB detection using this new technology, which is very, very exciting. Government very, very much supports it. We have a small office in the Brangahafa region in a place called Nunkaranta. This is where a lot of migration stems from Ghana. So when they come back, they're usually coming back to this region. For some reason, culturally, they migrate more than any other region of the 10 regions in Ghana. And we have another office in the north of Tamale. This is Lomé, Togo, so you could see how close it is, and Cotonou is right here also on the water. Okay? Okay, this is our work with refugee resettlement. A long time ago, we used to have to do fingerprinting, actually, for US refugees, but not anymore. We don't do it anymore, but this is just an old photo. And I actually took that little photo on the left. I like that photo. You know, sometimes you have little kids that are migrating actually alone. Their parents have already migrated and they're sending for the children, because in some countries, including the US, there's a policy on family reunification. So these kids were traveling on their own. Usually the parents request an escort, of which usually it's IOM staff. Well, it's always IOM staff that would escort the child, but sometimes the airlines do it. It just depends upon the wishes of the parents. So our biggest program, as I mentioned, is the US, but also Canada accepts a large number, in Australia. IOM Ghana actually handles regional resettlement. So we handle all of West and Central Africa, including DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. So we have to facilitate. But we have staff in those offices that actually do a lot of the work, but we are coordinating and facilitating. We also give cultural orientation for the Canadian government and the Australian government, not the US government, because a partner does that. So we give them, actually, Syracuse actually accepts a lot of refugees for resettlement. Books have been written actually mentioning Syracuse, but they need to be, they have very, very high expectations about what life is going to be like, say in the US or Canada, Australia. They have these big dreams and everything, but we have to kind of lower their expectations a little bit to make it more realistic. Also things like cold weather, what's a jacket? things like that. And then another agency would take over in the States where they help them, how to use a stove and things like that, but even how to fly on a plane. They've never flown on a plane, how to use the tray, how to use the toilet. These are all like very strange things. And then we also do repatriation, for example. So there was a big crisis with Liberia several times. Many Liberians became displaced. A lot of them came to Ghana because of the English speaking. And now the crisis is over. Liberia is considered stable. They have a lot of work to do, but now we have a program actually funded by the US government which assisted them to go back for those who wanted to go back. But we had several thousand that went back. Okay? This is just we do cultural orientation or migrant training. These were refugees that were going to Canada. Okay, this is what we do for migration and development. So we know that there are many people that live outside their country that want to contribute some way. So this is a Ghanaian medical doctor that lives in Europe, and we have programs that they can come back and contribute their services for up to 6 months. It's a very exciting program. It's been run for about 8 years now, and it continues. We also work with the government. Actually, recently, we supported the government to develop a diaspora support unit within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and it turned into a bureau, which is a very big step because first it was IOM providing a lot of support getting it going, but because it's now shifted to a bureau, which was the government decision, it becomes sustainable. The government takes over full ownership. This is a dream come true, really. Next. We do assisted voluntary return, so people that live in another country that are coming back, we assist them to start up small businesses. So for example, this is an onion, someone comes back and they're small businesses, they're not anything huge. This is someone doing onion sales. This is a group that set up a sunflower production because sunflower oil is very popular in Ghana. Migration health, we have 3 doctors, 4 nurses on staff. We have quite a large health department compared to other IOM offices. So this is just one of our doctors examining someone. We also do research on HIV or a lot of the work. Health is the kind of thing you really should mainstream in many projects because there's a lot of aspects of health that are important. This is emergency response. So this is the floods in Ghana, a photo of the floods. We provided some support, blanket distribution. This is after the Libya crisis. Many Ghanaians stranded in Libya. We helped with the evacuation. They came back. This is them coming back. This is Ghana, and Ghana is really hot. But you could see this guy with a jacket. He just got off the plane because Libya was cold at the time. Not too cold, but cold enough. We have also done work on information campaigns on safe migration. Many people are traveling actually through the desert to get to the north of Africa and then hopefully to get to Europe. It's a very dangerous journey. So this is like drama on safe migration posters. Next. Counter trafficking. We have child trafficking is a big issue in Ghana. Parents are there's an extended family culture where you give your child to someone else to raise them, hoping that they have a better life. There may be an exchange of money. In these cases, there's an exchange of money usually. So the children go to live with someone, the parents think that they're going to have a good education. Usually it's because of poverty as to why they might sell their child because they can't take care of them themselves. But then the children are exploited. They work on fishing. They have to get up very early in the morning. They're abused. They're the outside child. They're not really the child of the family. They're exploited. They don't go to school. They're abused. So IOM works with the government and also the children and the fishing communities in order to address this issue. So we work on very much providing education and psychosocial support. It's like what we call a rescue, and then rehabilitation and reintegration. And then we provide support to the families to address why they might have sold them in the first place. As some of them don't really, the majority actually didn't know it was so bad because it's so cultural. Okay, this is a program we had on labor migration, which was funded by the European Commission. So we had Ghanaian farm workers go to Italy to work on farms for periods of 3 months, and then they came back. This is border management. We do work in border management. We have a new program coming by the EC. So this is Ghana Immigration Service being trained by our guy from the Africa Capacity Building Center. This is me. Next. We work on research, so doing a migration profile. We've also done HIV/AIDS research on what we call corridor routes, transport routes, and sex workers. But we do other research too. And these are just some cross-cutting issues that we might deal with, like climate change. Migration and climate change is actually becoming a big thing now. It's a big, trendy thing. Migration and peacebuilding. Actually, I give a training at the Kofi Annan Peacekeeping Center in Accra on DDR, demobilization, disarmament, and reintegration. That's what it stands for. Migration data we work on, internal migration issues, mainstreaming migration to development planning, like policy development, making sure migration is featured. Okay, that's it. So that's in a nutshell, okay? Now, advice to you. I guess I give, maybe we could, what would my advice to you? I guess everybody, I don't know if people are looking for employment as to why they came. It's called the Career Center. So career, what was this session called? Career Information Session. Okay. I mean, you know, people get into IOM or the UN or NGOs in many ways. There's no real standard process of getting into any organization, okay? In my case, it was a matter of getting in at the right time, really. Actually, I had a connection to get me an internship. That person helped me get an internship, an unpaid internship, but I got in at the right time. I got lucky. These days, I would say an internship doesn't always lead to a job, okay? I like to be realistic. I have a lot of people contact me. They want to do internships with IOM, and I'm very transparent that it will not lead to a job. If you want to come to do an internship for the experience, to put it on your CV, please come. But don't, because I don't want them to have this expectation. When I look at a CV, the most important thing is I look at the international experience, actually. If someone has only been in one country, you know, like I'm just saying from the perspective of an American student, if they've only have nothing international, I probably wouldn't look at it a little bit more, even if they might have a degree in migration, just because they don't have the international experience. International experience is quite important, I think, at least for me. Ask someone else, they might give you another situation. My advice is, there is a policy within IOM and the UN to take internal candidates over external candidates. Okay, this is a policy. It doesn't mean, though, that external people can't get into IOM, because there's a lot of external people that get into IOM. Sometimes what happens is during an emergency missions are the easier ones to get into if you're willing to go to an emergency, because all of a sudden organizations have to grow, and they have to grow quite quickly. So they take people that might be in the country already, or people that they might have on, know someone of someone to go there. If you speak French, I think it's a really good thing. We're having a problem in, there's a lot of crisis one after the other in West Africa. French speaking is very marketable. I think speaking another language is quite marketable, but especially French, because a lot of countries that we deal with in French. For South America, we don't have so many Spanish-speaking countries. We have, they tend to rely on the national staff there a lot, so there's not a lot of, even for me to go to South America would be very difficult. I think there's programs called UNV, UN Volunteer, United Nations Volunteer. They're a bit easier to get into. Actually, you're not really a volunteer. You're actually working for the UN. You don't get paid as much, but you get a very decent salary, like $3,000 or $4,000 a month. That's a very decent salary in a lot of countries that you might go to, and it really gives you the experience. And then when you're in that country, you might be able to make contacts. NGOs, another way to get in. I think One of the NGOs that I really respect, but there's many out there, is MSF, which is a health, actually. Even if you're not a health person, okay, there's two pillars. One is for health, people that are doctors, nurses, whatever, pharmacists can go on that, but there's also the administration side. They need people to manage projects and function, do the admin and things like that. That's another organization. I think tell everybody you know, use your contacts, because sometimes people hear about things. You know, I had, sometimes I look internally within Ghana if I have to hire an international. So for example, someone's spouse who's highly educated, living in Ghana, you know, is looking, you know, they're not working, but they have a lot of skills. So if you know, they're not on a big contract, so for the organization it saves some money, you could hire them directly within the country. So sometimes I do that. I think just, yeah, it's hard to say. There's like no prescriptive way of getting in. Definitely do internships. I think they're important because they actually look good on the CV, to show that you have some kind of experience. Yeah, even here in the States, if you can get something with the international, if international is what you want to do. I mean, if you want to go, even in the States, if you work for an organization that has like an international kind of coverage, even if you're working in the States, that's, I also think that's important. I look at that as well. Yeah, I don't know if I I think some things will come out when you ask questions. And I'll be honest, I'll give you my advice and things like that.
I don't so much have a question, but I just wanted to say that the things that you say we have heard over and over from other representatives
Okay,
from the
good.
organization as well, which is things like the emergency situation.
Yeah.
Students are always saying, well, how do I get experience? How do I get experience? And just as you said, you know, it's getting in at that level, but you know, it's getting in low and staying low for all, getting in the field, getting known in the field. These are the types of things. So I think that's part of it. My question is, and you gave some great pieces of that, are ways that students, you know, can do those types of things, get in the field. Emergency crisis is, you know, a lot of students say just get on a plane and go. I mean, I think sometimes the logistics or the ways to think about how you manage that. And I think you're right. I think it probably comes down to connecting with people first, so when those things happen. But I didn't know if you had other suggestions, ways they can get in the field as well that would be outside of an emergency situation, for example.
I mean, okay, I wouldn't go, my advice is not to just fly into a country.
Right.
I don't think it's going to work.
Right.
It could work and you could get lucky, but I think it's a big, you don't know a country, you're a tourist in that country almost, you know, and then all of a sudden you don't have any contacts. If you know someone in that country and you can stay with them for a little while, that may work. It may not, I don't know, but I wouldn't go to a country where you don't know anybody just hoping that you might get a job. I think it could be a waste of money, to be honest with you. I will tell you, I think you said something quite important, is that when I started as an intern with IOM, I actually had 2 masters. My parents my mother especially thought I was crazy. You know, like, how could you know, you have a good education, you've already been working for 6 years. How could you not get paid, you know? But I told her, well, I think this could, you know, it's something I enjoy. And I actually loved my work, the interning. I loved it. And I got lucky. It led to something. But sometimes you might have to step back a little bit and not get the highest salary. And it could work, you know. Going internationally, I don't know. I honestly feel like tell as many people as you can. You know, tell as many people as you can. You're at Syracuse. You have professors that have contacts. You know. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. There's a website called Relief Web. I don't know if anybody heard of Relief Web. They post a lot of advertisements for jobs in this field. They're all, you know, things that you probably want to do. many of them. Some you won't have the skills for, but some do. I don't know anybody who's applied through it and whether it works, but they post a lot of jobs. I think your CV is quite important, the way your CV looks. Yeah.
And things like the international experience, showing that however you can do it within what you have, that you're engaged in the international piece and the languages.
I think languages, I'm not, I'll be honest. I lived in Japan for 3 years. I used to be able to speak some Japanese, but I speak English. Sometimes I see people that speak several languages who might not have the same credentials, and they could get good jobs because they speak many languages. Languages are very, very important. But I can't say for me, you know, but I would totally recommend if you could speak another language, this is very marketable, really marketable. If you speak one of the languages, well, English and then another language, especially like Arabic, French, Spanish, these are very important within the organization. I'm not so good at Spanish, and I don't speak French, so, but.
What's the skills that you're looking for in entry-level positions people applying to?
Well, see, when we're looking for to hire someone, we're looking at the qualifications of the job. So it depends upon the job. I would be looking for different things. But I could say one of the things I think we lack, that we really need, is proposal development and fundraising, because we don't make any profit, but in order to exist, we need funds. Everything that I pay in my office, from staffing salaries to driving somewhere to implementing something, comes from donor funds. So we constantly need to write proposals, strong proposals, and liaise with donors. A lot of it's about relationship building. So if I could see that someone can write proposals, they have experience, I like that. And that they could show that they've somehow gotten some funds. But really, if they can write proposals, I need good writers. Sometimes, even if I have a project manager, I'm filling a project manager position, I want to see that they could write proposals too. I would love, because then I can get 2 for the price of 1, Because every manager needs to continue to write proposals as well. They can't just implement the project, because that project is going to end. Nothing lasts, a lifetime. You have 1-year projects, sometimes you have 6-month projects, sometimes you have 2-year projects, 3 years, but it will end. And unless you have the ability to continue to develop. So I'm just giving a personal perspective of what I'm looking for.
Yeah, I'm attending this talk because I'm Ghanaian.
I thought you were. I saw your face.
Tamale specific.
Oh, okay, great.
Yes, yeah. And your office is just around where I live.
Okay.
Yeah. So I want to find out, as a Ghanaian, how can I get involved in IOM?
Okay, when you get back to Ghana, well, you would have to accept that you would be a national staff.
Yes.
Okay, because that's the majority of positions would be national staff. Tamale, we only have 1 staff there because we don't really have a project. We used to have a project, but I wanted to maintain a presence there, so we're supporting 1 staff. So there's not a lot of going on, but there's a lot of work to be done in the north, Yeah. So we're looking to expand there. I don't know. I don't know what your background is. We do have vacancies. We have a few that are coming up in the area of this big EC funding project. Actually, we'll be hiring about 2 new staff. So if your qualifications match that, there are 3 components. One is border management. One is and capacity building. One is data, migration data is very difficult, and migration data is being collected by different departments, but nothing is coordinated, so we're looking at that. That's one component. And then another component is information on safe migration and return and reintegration type. It's a 3-year project, so we know who's managing it. It's a colleague that's already there. So yeah, so send your CV maybe. We'll be advertising through the newspapers, but we could give you the heads up. Yeah, and another way I forgot to mention, and I don't know how good the U.S. is about that. I don't know what everybody's nationality is. What's your nationality? China, Ghanaian, American, Tajikistan. Okay. There's programs. I don't know about Tajikistan. I don't know about Ghana, and I don't know about China. But they have this program called the Associate Expert Program. Many governments, especially Europeans.
Donor countries?
Yes, so it's also called Junior Professional Officer. I know there's a Zimbabwean that got funded by the Italian government to do this because, like the Zimbabwean government doesn't have the money to support, but so the Italian government said, okay, we'll support someone that's government doesn't have enough money to support. And they're usually very highly qualified. And I know the US has a program, but I haven't yet met anybody. Maybe it's only a small program for Americans, but a lot of times, like right now, we have a Japanese, what we call an associate expert. It's an entry-level position, and their people are really qualified. So actually, the person that so they're supported 100% by their government, so we get someone that works for free. We don't have to pay. They don't work for free. We don't have to pay their salary. The Japanese government pays the salary. But the hope is that if we have something, they get 2 years of experience, 2 to 3 years of experience in IOM, and then the idea is that they would, hopefully we would find funding to keep them on in our office or in another office. So actually we have the funding in our office to keep the person on, and that's the person that will manage the CC project. Very good, highly qualified. So you have to check, like through the State Department or whatever. I don't know the US. I'm not sure about China. I don't think Ghana, but if you can get supported by another government, I can put you in touch with like this Zimbabwean woman, how she got this position. And I know we have Syracuse graduates, actually. We had another Japanese in Zimbabwe called Daihei Mochizuki. I don't know if anybody remembers the name. He actually started as a Japanese in Ghana, in Zimbabwe, and now he's in Kenya working for Somalia with IOM. So we try to retain them. So I know we take definitely Syracuse, but it depends upon the government that supports.
So I'm actually an undergraduate.
Okay.
And you mentioned that you had 6 years of experience and 2 master's degree underneath your belt. Do you think that grad school on this level is more important, or the international experience, such as Peace Corps, volunteer?
Peace Corps is another way to get good experience. That's another thing to recommend.
Or you just really have to get lucky and have the end?
Well, yeah, I'd like to say it's sometimes luck, really. I have to be honest, it's sometimes luck. If you have a desire, you will get somewhere. If you keep pushing and you'll hit lots of roadblocks along the way, definitely. But I think the people that will succeed are the people that hit the roadblocks and then keep trying. So if you know what you want. Peace Corps is a really good, I should have mentioned that. I think it's Peace Corps, really gives you the experience. We have a lot of Peace Corps people in Ghana. Actually, a young guy who we resettled to the US from South Sudan. Actually, he became a refugee in Ethiopia. And he came back to Ghana. He became an American citizen eventually, and he came back to Ghana to do his Peace Corps. And that exposes you to all the international organizations, the Peace Corps. I don't know if your countries have, I think the UK has, I know the US has. That's a good thing. Whether a master's or Peace Corps, maybe if I can give advice, I would say go for the Peace Corps, because after you finish the Peace Corps, you also can get a master's at a reduced, I think they have special programs for people, so you actually don't pay as much as other students, depending upon the university you go to. I'd say nowadays you need masters. You don't necessarily need the PhD, but I think these days, you have so many educated people in the world, and sometimes you need the master's, but you could do it like distance learning, or if you don't want to go back full time. I also we have a program with Syracuse, like an internship program in the field, and I'm still in touch with many of them. And someone that graduated undergrad at Syracuse, a Chinese student, and she was trying to determine where she should go and do her master's. So she got into really good schools like Johns Hopkins and like a Harvard, or she got into very, very good schools, and she was trying to decide, well, should I go to like Harvard because of the reputation, which helps a lot. I mean, the reputation helps, or should I go to SIUS or whatever, Johns Hopkins, because it's the program that I'm really interested in. And I said, the reality is that we have some people from good universities, but the majority are from, maybe we have like 2 IOM staff that went to Harvard, I don't know, but the majority are not amongst the best of the best. The important thing is to, I told her go to Johns Hopkins. It's more of the program she wanted. She still has great professors, she still has those contacts. That's what I would do, because we're not saying just because you went to Harvard, you're going to get a job with IOM. You have to, we have all kinds of people, and we have people that don't have masters as well. So I'm not saying also you need the masters, but I'd say go for the Peace Corps first and then go for the masters. Any other questions?
You mentioned all these different operations that you have in the field. What's the most difficult part in terms of management and implementation and measurement to success?
Good. This is this is what I'm always promoting. The most difficult part is the startup of a project. You get the funding. Okay, it's difficult to get the funding. It's difficult to write the proposal. But once you get the funding, I've seen a lot of projects. We can get, organizations get funding, but then they can't implement. And I always tell my colleagues in Ghana, the most difficult part is the startup. You need to know what you're measuring, what your indicators are, what your outputs are, what your outcomes. You have to create the tools. You have to invest a lot of time in creating a good project. Not that it can't change along the way, but if you don't set up the systems from the beginning, it's very hard to go back. So for example, I've seen emergencies where we're distributing NFIs, but we have no way of record keeping. We're just giving people things. But you need a system, because you are accountable to the donors. You have to have a backup. You can't all of a sudden say, well, I think we distributed 600 by going back to old records, or 6,000 or whatever. If you have a system and you invest a lot of time, there's a lot of pressure when a project starts. If you're doing it right, you should feel under stress. But once you get the project going, it can run itself. And yes, you have to tweak it along the way. But then that becomes easier for reporting. And I think for donors, they want to see a reliable partner. They want to see that you're not just because you get the money doesn't mean that you can't implement a quality program. So I would say that's really invest a lot of time in that. And know that everybody should be going under stress in the beginning of a project, everybody. Because if you're not doing it right, then there's a lot of work that has to be done.
I'm interested in development issues, but I do not how to choose, such as the labor, migration, and education. I don't know how to focus on one field to do things, because my interest is little broad.
I think it's okay. I don't think there's anything wrong with it.
So I just to try everyone and to focus one.
Yeah, I would say for me, I'm a generalist. I'm not an expert in, I can manage an office, I know about financial management, I could guide my colleagues, but I'm not actually an expert in counter trafficking. I'm not an expert in whatever. Our Japanese colleague also felt like she had to specialize. And I told her, you don't have to specialize. I think if you specialize, it could lead to something in your field because you show you have the expertise, but it could also limit you as well. So if you really like something and you want to specialize in that, go for it. But don't be worried that you're not specializing. That's my advice. You know? Any other questions?
Yeah, I got a bunch. So.
Okay, go ahead.
I wrote them along the way. How do you guys tie migration to the climate change, and what's the biggest question around it?
Okay.
I kind of see other aspects, but migration, I never thought of migration.
Migration, okay. You know, the world is changing. You know, climate change, there's climate change. You know, you have floods, you have desertification, you have soil erosion, and these lead people to be displaced, actually. So you might have, an example is the coast. You know, our world is changing. You might not see the coast is changing, but water is coming up and land is being taken away. And then you have cycles of people that might happen. Or you have a changing climate and then there's a flood. There's lots of floods. So should people be really living there? You know, maybe you have to change that. So actually climate change, I'm not an expert in climate change, but it's something IOM does. And I would say it's a very, very, it's probably the trendiest topic right now. Everybody's jumping on the bandwagon with climate change. Many of the UN agencies are working on climate change, depending upon their mandate and their expertise. You know, I could say in Ghana, like UNDP, United Nations Development Program's taking the lead on climate change. I would say that we have expertise at our headquarters level, and we could talk about and we could respond to emergencies. But can I say that in Ghana we have expertise in that? I would say probably not. But if you're talking about research, but we can respond. You know. So it's important if you can understand that.
Okay, one more.
Mm-hmm.
You were talking about when the refugees from Liberia,
Mm-hmm.
you resettled them back since the country is considered to be stable. What's the hardest part in moving? Are they willing to go back, or what's the biggest problem with?
Okay, IOM does not do any forced migration.
Yeah.
If people don't want to go back, we are not going to assist them to go back. So it's whenever we do a movement of someone, it's completely voluntary. Actually, we have governments that contact us and say they want to deport people. You know, some of the European governments want to deport people. They're very into, it costs a lot of money to, no, IOM will not be involved in this. It's at their expense. They want to do a deportation. We don't believe in deportation. That we think that there are better ways to treat people. And we don't get involved in it. So everybody who wanted to go home went home. And we're talking about tens and thousands of migrants in Liberia, in Ghana, Liberians, and even in other countries. I would say like 4,000 went home. So not everybody went home.
What's the biggest challenge for them in terms of integration there? Yeah,
the biggest challenge is that in my opinion, they're going to the unknown, if I could be real. But they know. It's about an informed decision. There's some programs that maybe they could tap into, but they have to expect that they're going back, and they may be able to tap into that, they may not. So they're starting from scratch, some of them. We're working with UNIDO, United Nations International Development, something they do, industry something. They have funded by the Japanese government, they have a reintegration component for returnees. So we're actually going to we're partnering with them. We had our own program, which we did with UNHCR, but we have another one with UNIDO where we're working on the reintegration for several hundred of them. But that's only several hundred out of thousands, So some of them hold out for resettlement. Everybody has this big dream of going to the US or Canada or Australia, and unfortunately, this image is a bit difficult. We have I could go into another story, another program. We have a Sri Lankan migrants stranded in West Africa. They were on their way to Canada. They got stranded in West Africa because they were a part of a smuggling thing. They didn't know it. They got frauded. Lots of money, $10,000 a person, paying, thinking that they're going. Now they're in West Africa. And most of them went home, back to Sri Lanka. They realized they have to give up this dream that they're not going to get to Canada. But some of them will not go. They want to stay. They don't want to be in West Africa. and they think that if they wait long enough, they might get resettled. This is not, a very small percentage of people get resettled who are refugees in the world. So you have to work on the psychosocial, probably they're not going to get resettled, So that's difficult too. Okay. Any other questions?
How is it, you were in London and now you're in Ghana. Do you have a family, and what kind of family life living conditions do you live in on a day-to-day basis?
Okay. Well, I have a husband who I met in the UK, who's Chilean, who actually I found out later he was resettled. He was helped to move to England, his family, during the coup in Chile by IOM. I just found out about a year ago. His mother told me she remembers, that, I don't know if you know, but IOM gives these big plastic bags. Do you see these? Ever see these? Yeah, maybe you saw.
Yeah.
So if you see in the airport someone carrying a plastic bag, they're probably, sometimes I carry the plastic bag too, and I'm not a refugee, but so, you see, most cases they're refugees, and my mother-in-law just told me that she remembers that plastic bag. So it was, so what was your question? I got sidetracked.
I guess it's just, how you got to where you are, and how, you grew up American.
Oh, yeah.
Living in Ghana, what kind of life you have.
Yeah, okay, so I met my husband in the UK, and he was doing his PhD. So when I moved to Zimbabwe, he could move with me because he didn't have a career. He could finish his PhD. He's also a musician. He really interacted in Ghana, even with musicians in Zimbabwe. But while we were in Ghana, he got his PhD. And then he got a job at the University of Manchester in the UK. So it's a little difficult, I think one of the challenges, I have no kids, but I have 2 dogs that we inherited in Zimbabwe. They're a handful. But, one of the things is when you are in this line of work, often someone's always sacrificing. And that's sometimes very difficult for families, I think. I know a lot of people with children. I think it's actually my husband's family who, his father, when they became refugees in the UK, his father was a lawyer. His mother was a lawyer too, but she ended up having to give up her career, actually. The father got a job with UNHCR as a lawyer, and they moved around. I think he's a very well-adjusted kid. I think it exposed him to probably a lot of things. I see the kids, I really, I have a lot of friends with kids that grow up abroad, and I think it's great. Actually, if I had kids, I would be really happy. You always have to accept the fact that you're going to move, So I think when you have kids, the older they get, sometimes it gets harder. But some of them might stay, they might ask, can I stay until my child graduates? Maybe they have 2 years left, so the child can graduate. But I think there's always this, when it comes to couples, there's always a stress of, unfortunately, someone having to give up the career. I mean, for me, I've been in Ghana almost 5 years, so I'll probably be rotating very soon. I'm trying to get to Europe. Not that I think the work is so interesting there with IOM, but because I want to be closer to my husband. So then he'll live with me and do the reverse commute. I mean, luckily he's an academic, so he only has to teach 1 day a week, and he's trying for this research position anyway. So if he has the research position, he doesn't even have to be based in the UK. So I think it'll work. I mean, we'll make it work. He's actually flying on his way to Washington, D.C., which is my next trip. So only for 5 days, but it's something. We have a trip to plan to Chile in April. So we make it, you got to make it work. You have to be committed, but it's not easy. It depends upon the people, I think.
You talked about land grabs, land in your presentation. Does that include land grabs? And along with that, what challenges do you feel when what you guys are trying to do as an organization doesn't necessarily line up with the government of the country?
Okay, let me go to the second question first. Zimbabwe is the perfect example. You know, you have a government that is doing crazy things. You know, I would say that Zimbabwean government officials were great to work with, though. You know, I think they were really smart, committed, dedicated. You know, so I will never say anything, but they did crazy things. I mean, you know, they took land from people. We didn't agree with their policy, but it's, as an intergovernmental organization, it's very important that we don't get involved in the politics of a country. We support whatever government is in power. We might not support the government, like in the case of Zimbabwe, we wouldn't support the government. We might give them some capacity building in certain areas, but we wouldn't give them any funding or anything like that. But we're there to provide support. We're there to help the country, the people. And if you start getting involved in politics, you will find out very quickly that you will not be able to operate in that country. You know, everybody thinks like the UN, you know, why can't you just stop people from doing things, you know, governments from doing things? It's not so easy. It's not so easy, because as soon as you are too forceful, you could be kicked out. You are a visitor in their country, whether we like it or not. You know, you're a visitor in their country. So you have to try to play the politics. So for example, in Zimbabwe, we couldn't call people that got displaced, we couldn't call them internally displaced persons. We had to call them mobile and vulnerable populations. You know, just change the terminology a little bit, and then you could provide assistance. Then they wouldn't get in your way. They would allow, as long as you didn't become so political. Same with Ghana, although Ghana is a very different case than Zimbabwe. Whatever government is in power, that's the government we're working with, okay? And it's very important that you maintain that. And then the other thing about the land grabs, you know, we do land. I haven't been in a country that's like working on compensation programs for land. Like Nepal is working on that right now. I think Sierra Leone is as well. I think other countries, maybe in South America, I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly. I have to be honest with you. I'm not exactly sure how it works and how. I think every country would handle it differently. But you could read on the website. I'm sorry, I don't really know the answer to that one. So any other questions?
We're exhausted.
No, I love questions. You know, when I first moved to Japan, every country you move to, you have to get used to the culture, the way things are done. And when I first moved, of course, I was a teacher. American students always ask a lot of questions. And then I went to teach in Japan, and I gave a presentation of my life, and with lots of photos. And I expected there would be tons of questions at the end of my presentation, and silence. So it's like,
not cultural, is it?
Yes, it's cultural. Yeah. They don't ask questions, So I would have to develop my, because you're China, Asia, not many questions. But you have to change the way you teach to try to encourage questions in some way. So you almost like a forced question. You learn methodologies.
Person to, yeah.
What?
As students, the question. Yeah, not the students ask the teacher a question. Yeah, it changed.
Yeah, exactly. So. Yeah, so I enjoyed it. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Oh, yes, and the other, sorry.
I'm cueing Lauren.
We have a little parting gift.
Aw, that's so sweet.